The story started for me personally about 14 years ago. I was on the other end of a phone call from a loved one who tried to take their own life. And it really shook me to my core. I think a lot of communities, particularly communities of color, mental health is the no-go zone. It's the topic that most everyone doesn't talk about. It took us some time to realize that the fundamental challenge was access to care, and that if we really wanted to solve this, we needed to start to become a provider ourselves and deliver that care. And when we think about, who was working in this space, looking to destigmatize access, the Headspace team had done an incredible job. Time's 100 most influential brands on Netflix, partnerships with Sesame Street, with Nike, with all these really fascinating, incredible consumer brands that unlocked access to hundreds of millions of people. And so when we think about solving the world mental health crisis, the combination of both that brand, which allows people to start to participate in an easier way, plus the power of content, which can be far more scalable than just people alone, really meant that we could start to achieve our mission in a meaningful way.
Hello, I'm Andrea Palton from Techstars. Today we're interviewing Karan Singh, the COO of Headspace Health. That is the app Headspace, which I am a huge fan of, so I'm super excited to talk to him. The reason that Karan is here with us today is that he's also the co-founder of Ginger, and Ginger went through one of our Techstars accelerator programs. So today we're going to be talking to him about his experience as a founder, his experience throughout Techstars, and also what he's doing now and what he's up to. And I'm going to be asking him if he has any tips for founders so they can be successful as well. Hi, Karan. Thank you so much for being here. So I'd love for you to get started with how you started with Ginger in the first place.
Andrew, thank you again for having me. I've been on this adventure for a little over 12 years here at Ginger, but the story started for me personally about 14 years ago. I was on the other end of a phone call from a loved one who tried to take their own life. And it really shook me to my core. I've always thought of myself as a good read of people, a good judge in character, and I just had absolutely no idea. And I think a lot of communities, particularly communities of color, mental health is the no-go zone. It's the topic that most everyone doesn't talk about, and that was certainly true for us. And so I realized I wanted to try to do something about it. I started to dig into the space and ultimately decided I want to go back to graduate school at MIT and Harvard and at the business school, medical school, to really study and see if I could do something at this intersection of healthcare meets technology. And we originally founded Ginger originally as a technology company more than anything, selling into provider groups, and ultimately decided to pivot and become a mental health provider delivering care to members.
So when you first started, before you did the second part, what kind of technology were you trying to sell?
Originally, it was using data you could collect off of a smartphone to really infer when someone was having a flare up of their mental health, a flare up of their stress or anxiety, or depression. And there is no, great blood test for your depression or easy way to measure stress. And it turned out you could use some of this information to really predict when someone wasn't doing so well. And what we discovered through that process was, the technology worked incredibly well. We could predict with a high degree of accuracy when people might be trending negatively, when they might actually have a symptom or episode. The challenge was we weren't solving the fundamental problem in the space. And that was that, most people couldn't even get through the front door. That access to care was really the core challenge, that there just aren't enough providers to meet the demand. And the demand was through the roof, and that was prior to COVID, and everything else has happened from the last few years when, in some cases demand has almost doubled. And so we not quickly actually, it took us some time to realize that the fundamental challenge was access to care, and that if we really wanted to solve this, we needed to start to become a provider ourselves and deliver that care.
So most of the people that are listening are founders, and a lot of them are probably in the middle of the stage of, should I pivot?
Yeah.
When you were going through that, how long? You said at first you quickly, and then you backtracked and said, well, it took us a while. How long did it take you when you first started thinking about, we might need to pivot, to when you actually did?
Too long. It's like the easy answer, too long. I mean, we were, had actually raised our seed, our A and our B almost, over a 4-year period. And then after closing our series B, realized that, we had these landmark early customers, but they weren't translating from pilot to scale deployments. And I think we had fooled ourselves into thinking that the data we had was stronger than it was. And it was really challenging. I think part of what I realized through that experience is just how critical it is to really pressure test when you have product market fit and understand, how real is real. And so that was really sort of phase one of our 3 pivots as a company, if you will, our business model pivot, which had to do with really discovering that we needed to solve this fundamental challenge around access to care, and that becoming a provider was the way to do that. It took a lot of heartache to both retool the company and retool the product and retool the board to really unlock that, because it was a fundamentally different, different swing. And it also meant different level of capital, different leadership team. And so that was kind of pivot number 2 in some ways, which was, getting our who right and figuring out not just the business model, but our team pivot, and making sure that we actually had the right leadership around the table who knew not only how to build an incredible product for members, but to actually build a virtual clinic, a virtual hospital.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you pivoted.
So
So when you pivoted, did you join a Techstars accelerator before or after the pivot?
Before, yeah, no, we actually were in the Boston 2011 Techstars class with Katie Ray and team, and with the original business model, and then sort of scaled that for a number of years, and then decided that we actually really needed, in order to stay true to the mission, that we actually had to become a provider of care. And then lesson 2 is then figuring out how do you really change out the team and make sure that you have the right DNA around the table, because the company you build is the team you build. And that's a really, really hard process, and something that also took maybe more time than I think in retrospect would have liked. But now in retrospect, realize just how critical it is to get your who right, because when you do, it not only changes the trajectory of the company, but it also makes it a whole lot more fun, because you get the right people around the table who all have the right mentality and the right mindset to really execute. And as we changed the business model, it needed a new set of people. The first kind of tribe that was with us was incredible and so helpful. And as we changed, we realized we needed different kinds of people in different roles.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. How did you learn which people needed to be in which roles?
Well, we got it wrong a whole lot. So part of it was, an iteration, and partly that was not so much the people's, fault per se, as much as it was us setting up the right organizational structure, clear roles and responsibilities, a clear, decision-making framework. And so part of it was us understanding, well, what kind of DNA do we think, what kind of subject matter expertise is like essential to this new company and product that we're building. We asked a lot of people for advice and help. We worked with a recruiter and ultimately ended up running a CEO search to bring in some additional talent. We talked to our board. We debated with our board. We had lots of intense discussion, and really just to articulate exactly what it is we need. Like, what did we learn, and how did that then inform kind of who we needed now? But I think one of the most challenging things in that process was figuring out who to listen to, because everyone had an opinion. And I think figuring out, whose opinion we really trusted for that stage and that phase in the company, I think that was really critical, and took some time to really get right.
Yeah. So once you got all that right, and you're running Ginger, it's going really well. At what point did you say, wow, this is working? I'm at the height of my career at Ginger, or Ginger is at the height of where it could be?
I'm not sure if I've ever felt that, and maybe that's just true for any entrepreneur. They always feel like there's another sort of milestone they can cross. I will say there's certainly the pre-COVID version of the story where, particularly for 2 years, I'd say we started to see some really incredible traction as particularly employers started to realize that they weren't offering, comprehensive mental health resources to their teams, and they started to buy and buy very quickly, and that was really exciting. And then, COVID hit, the world shut down. Many people moved to a virtual care model, which is really sort of foundational to how we were delivering support. And that certainly turbocharged a lot of interest and also demand for the services. And it ultimately translated into, a year after that, us deciding to merge with the Headspace team and create this combined entity to solve. So, I don't know if it was, I think one of the lessons I've learned, and that's maybe pivot number 3, is my own pivot as an entrepreneur and in my own mindset is how to pause along the way and actually do a better job of saying, we hit a milestone marker. Let's celebrate that. Let's take a beat. Let's pause, because this is, solving the world's mental health crisis is a forever game. It's, and we're not going to do it alone. And so you've got to enjoy some of those moments along the way. And, certainly I felt like the merger with the Headspace team was one of those moments, but that was a couple of years later.
Oh yeah. I mean, that had to have been huge. So a lot of the founders, again, right, that's one of their goals, is to either go public or sell the company or get acquired or partner with another company. Tell us how how did the conversation even get started?
Yeah, well, and I will say, because I remember I had sort of a similar mindset too, and I think it's evolved over the years to really, like, what would it take to achieve this mission, and any number of those outcomes might be the right solution, but it's not necessarily always clear. And so for us, I think there were 2 parts. One was, the importance of brand to really destigmatizing access to care, and 2 was the importance of content to driving scalability. When we made that pivot from sort of a technology company to becoming a provider of care, wrote down on a napkin the 3 C's: coaching, clinical, and content, and talked about, you got to pick 2 out of 3. You can't do all the things. And we largely at Ginger had picked coaching and clinical services, really sort of empowering people or care providers to deliver care. And we did some amount of content, but really, in a pretty limited way as I look back. And when we think about, who was working in this space, looking to destigmatize access, the Headspace team had done an incredible job. Times 100 most influential brands on Netflix, partnerships with Sesame Street, with Nike, with all these like really fascinating, incredible consumer brands that unlocked access to, hundreds of millions of people. And so when we think about solving the world mental health crisis, the combination of both that brand, which allows people to start to participate in an easier way, plus the power of content, which can be far more scalable than just people alone, really meant that we could start to achieve our mission in a meaningful way. And so, that was now almost 2 years ago. We started the conversations a little over 2 years ago, and ultimately merged around this time back in 2021. And it's been exciting and fun and hard and all the things. As it's, a new level of scale and a new set of challenges.
Yeah. So as a founder, obviously you're celebrating, this is a huge achievement. Was there also a little bit of sadness of no longer being the co-founder, and now you are essentially an employee of Headspace?
Yeah, I think at every stage you have to check the ego. And I think that's true at all times. In some ways, as we merged, we often thought about it as a refounding moment. So in some ways, you get to do it. You get to do it again. I go through this exercise about 3 to 4 years. My wife keeps me honest to re-recruit myself and really make sure that like this is still the thing that I want to be doing. And that moment was definitely another one of those. Well, okay, now with this combined entity and this, do I still want to be doing this? And I very quickly came to the conclusion that yes. But what I didn't appreciate at the time was there was this new tribe of people that I hadn't been exposed to, like these content creators and design, brand strategists and others who just have a different set of DNA that is actually so powerful in solving for this problem, but that we just hadn't optimized for previously. And part of, to answer your question, like that's given me some energy because it's a new sort of set of skills and problems to try to solve for. And so I've really enjoyed it. And yeah, no, it's you have to give away your Legos as you keep scaling, and that's part of the challenge. But now running 1,000-person plus company and operating in around the world with some really significant scale and revenue and most importantly with impact to millions of people around the world. I think that's ultimately more important than the title that you add after your name.
Yeah, oh, I love that. I mean, the impact that you're making with Headspace and with Ginger before is just amazing. We talked about this earlier. My cousin committed suicide, and so the mental health space is just so important. And during COVID, there were some other run-ins that we've had with founders being depressed and having you starting up a new business all by yourself at the beginning of COVID, and the founders were really struggling. Yeah. So for somebody that has been in the space, you went to school for it, now you work in it, what kind of advice do you have for founders to make sure that they do pay attention to their mental health?
Yeah, it's a topic I'm very, very passionate about, and would love to support anybody who's going through it, because the reality is everyone is, whether they say it or not, whether it's diagnosed mental health issue or some level of stress. There's a pretty wide spectrum, but the reality is you're in this constant up and down and in this constant comparison culture. And I think that was one of the challenges I had, frankly, as we were getting started, because that was really very much the ethos in this sort of startup ecosystem. And the conversation has moved up quite a bit in the last decade, but it's still there. And I think for me, it's do you first, right? It's take care of yourself first, and by doing so, you can take care of your team, and by doing so, you can achieve your mission. And sort of, it's inside out. And first time founder, I think that was part of the reason that we were excited to be a part of Techstars, was understanding, hey, we didn't have this tribe of other people who were going through a similar set of situations. We needed places and forums to be able to talk openly and honestly. It couldn't necessarily be your partner, or sometimes it couldn't even be your co-founder or others on the team. You needed actually a third party, expert who could help you. That could be a coach, potentially could be a therapist if you need it. It could be access to content. I'd be remiss in saying, meditation and mindfulness practice can be really, really powerful as a way to manage and respond, not just react. Put some space in between the stimuli that's constant and always losing an employee, losing a client, getting no on an investor, pitch when you thought you were across the finish line. Like, it's just you have to build resilience, and that's the only way you survive this journey. And it can be incredibly rewarding. So like both thoughts can be both true at the same time. And I just say, really taking that seriously and investing in it, because most people don't. And I know certainly in our early days, it was, always on all the time. And that was sort of the mentality. And we assumed like that was what was required to do this. But the reality is 12 years later, you're not around if you're operating like that, because you're going to burn out and you're going to not be successful. And so it doesn't mean you don't work hard. It just means, less but better, and focus on fewer things and do those well. And I think I wish there was more dialogue about that. I wish that there was more conversation about these other aspects that are sometimes just as important as nailing product market fit, because ultimately it's about the people you attract around the table, and for them to maintain the right mental health and mindset so that they can scale. So that would be my strong advocacy.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, as you know, we're really huge proponents of that at Techstars. And that's why we have the communities and we have mentors and we even have coaches for mental health. Brad Felt, one of the co-founders of Techstars, he speaks very openly about it. And I think that's so important when we have leaders like you, leaders like Brad Felt, that openly discuss this. This is normal. We all, you said, we all go through it. Everybody has ups and downs. Everybody has stress in their life in one form or the other.
Brad does such a great job of that. And I think that's so important because, and I know he was actually one of the first, frankly, I think, to really be so vocal, and it normalizes it.
Yeah, yeah. So when you do talk to a founder that's really new and maybe they do ask you about mental health, is that how you lead usually because of the space you're in and you recommend meditation and that type of thing? Or is there something that you lead with to get them to a good place?
Maybe there's multiple parts to that question. I would say, no, it's a great question. And because reality is most people aren't forthcoming and straightforward or have real candor in this, because you got to put up the shield and you got to put on your armor as you're going into battle. And so when you show weakness, people take advantage, and I think I can appreciate that. And I think by virtue, certainly for me personally, just by virtue of having gone through it and been in the grind, I usually look to try to disarm up front and let people know, like, well, let's name it. We don't have to dance around this. This is art, and I encourage people, to look for support, whatever that might be, and it could be a combination of things, but be intentional about it and really think about, in your perfect world, here's the combination of your, work life, personal life, family life, or otherwise, and start to like create space for it, because very easily, otherwise your startup or your company can just take it all. And in which case nothing wins, because the company doesn't scale in the right ways, and you suffer personally and maybe even from a family perspective.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about the industry that you're in, mental health, even tech, and the space that you're in. What do you think is the future of this space? Crystal ball, pretend like you have one.
Well, I'd say, as the eternal optimist entrepreneur, I'm really hopeful, because 10 plus 15 years ago, no one was talking about it. It was in the back room, and now it's in some ways in the boardroom, and you have it, conversations at companies, and and sometimes companies you wouldn't have expected to be talking about and recognizing just how important this is to the sustainability and viability of their businesses. So I'm hopeful about that. I'm seeing that in government and other policy changes that are starting to happen. And the flip side is, in the last few years, there's been real collective trauma across the board, and the rates of depression and anxiety are through the roof, particularly in the adolescent and teenage population, where it's just heartbreaking, to be frank. And so it's gone in the wrong direction. And so I'm excited about some of the innovation that's starting to happen there. I think there was a lot of activity over the last few years, certainly during COVID, and some of it was more feature than company. But I'm excited because I think there are now starting to be a number of really meaningful initiatives, programs, interventions that are going to hopefully stem the tide. And so for me, I'm hopeful that this combination of all of these different things coming together can really start to make a dent, and having great people solving this problem from multiple angles is gonna make an impact, because we're starting to see it. And I think, previously there wasn't even a recognition that mental health could be digital or virtual, all right, or technology enabled. Turns out actually can be. Now, it doesn't solve everything, and there's clearly a set of things that need to happen in an in-person environment, or there's more traditional resources. But given the size and scale and scope of this challenge, this is the only way we tackle this. And my strong advocacy is that we start to think about mental health as more than mental health care is more than just access to a therapist. I think there's a newfound sort of appreciation for the power of therapy, and I'm an incredible proponent, and we offer it within our resourcing, and it's one of a series of different things that can work. And so, to your earlier question, depending on what someone needs, they may need a combination of, maybe they need a coach, maybe they need some mindfulness and meditation, maybe they actually need access to a psychiatrist and access to medications because they may be more acute, or even in-person support in some way. So I think there's a pretty wide spectrum, and I'm starting to see some meaningful innovation. And hopefully, as the costs go down and it unlocks more access, and more people can get the support they need.
Yeah, I love that future. For some of the things that you said earlier, we're at time, so I want to be respectful of your time. But you mentioned, pivoting and some other tips for founders, and then we talked about some mental health tips that you have for founders. I'd love to ask you one last question. For any of the founders that are listening right now that are just starting out in their career, starting out with their startup, what is a top, or one of the top 1 to 2 pieces of advice that you can give to them? Because they look up to you, and you've done some amazing things, and they'd love to hear from you.
Top one is a hard one. I've got a number, but the reality is the only constant is change, right? And that is forever true. And so sometimes it feels like the ground is never stable. But if you go in thinking that is going to be true, that is in fact sort of the exercise and the journey that we're on, and you surround yourself with some of these resources, and you participate in communities like Techstars, and you really be mindful about this, you can build an incredible business and have real impact. But I think I would remember that mantra, and I would remember the idea that your company may fail, but you did it, and those are two different things. And that's okay. And you might pivot along the way because you're changing, and you're learning, and you're growing.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Thank you so much, Karan, for your time, and thank you for making such an impact in the work that you've done. We really, really appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Really, really appreciate it.